Listen, first off, I do want to offer up our support, but it is a cautious support for this bill. I think but I do want to congratulate and commend the minister on the whole process on this bill so far. Something that we and I have not seen. Well, I'll say I have not seen that sort of collaboration on any other bill yet in my few years here at the House. Now, you know, there was amendments offered up. There was clearly a willingness to listen to interested parties and take into consideration their justifiable concerns. So that is a plus. I do want to mention this, so you know, as has been mentioned by a number of speakers so far, they refer to the present system as fragmented, right? And that is indeed one way you could describe the present system as fragmented. You might also refer to it as dispersed and decentralized. And with this bill, and this is one of my why I offer up cautious support on this, we are now going to put that dispersed and decentralized system into the hands of a single chief prevention officer. And just to give some clarity for those people who may not realize, at the present time we have about 20 different occupational health and safety agencies or associations that provide training and workplace safety information, and they're based on industries. Remember from Haldeman Norfolk talked about his time with the Farm Safety Association. Myself, as a construction electrician, I was involved with the Construction Safety Association. But each industry is very unique, and the safety mechanisms and the safety training required is unique to each industry and often to each workplace. Clearly, safety in a restaurant is something significantly different from a construction electrician. It even, as a construction electrician, as compared to a high voltage electrician. There's very unique safety mechanisms and training that's required. So the fragmentation that has been referred to as a negative. There are some very powerful and substantial benefits from having that dispersed system that we did have. So we're going to move this into a single person with an advisory body, right at the present time, the Interim Prevention Council, then the Chief Prevention Officer. And of course, there's no way one individual or even a small group of individuals are going to be able to develop substantive, practical, workable safety and training programs for such a diverse economy that we have in this province. So I want to make this House aware of that concern, right? That concern, I think it's going to be important for the minister down the road as this bill travels through and as it gets implemented, that whoever the minister is, keep a good eye on how that is turning out. Because there is indeed some difficulties that may arise out of that. I also want to talk about, you know, we know what triggered, one of the main triggers of this bill was that tragic Christmas death of 4 people on a scaffold. And it was clear from the investigation on that tragedy that the present legislation, the present regulations were not being followed. It was clear that there was an element of the underground economy at play here that contributed substantially to that tragedy. And that's, I think, an important element that has been disregarded in this bill. There is, most employers in this province, I think everybody in this House will agree, the far, far greatest number of employers are very cognizant and very interested and of having a safe workplace. I've worked for many employers in my career, and I've yet to ever work for somebody who was dismissive or had a disregard for workplace safety. But there are a very small group out there who may be dismissive and disregard workplace safety. There are those who engage in the underground economy, we like to call it. And I'd like the government side to reflect a little bit on why that underground economy works, why it's there, and if you're not doing things that are contributing to a growth in that underground economy. And the Dean panel clearly focused and mentioned about the underground economy, but we don't see much in this bill on it. And that is, but we do know what grows the underground economy is the cost of doing business. If the legitimate cost of doing business increases or goes out of skew, if it becomes profitable to be illegitimate, more so than to be legitimate. And things like increasing taxation is a contributor to the underground economy. Things like the HST, things like increasing WSIB rates, those costs on legitimate contractors actually, if they get too high, they create an incentive to go to the underground. And we've all seen it, and we all recognize it, whether it's skyrocketing tobacco rates. That creates a black market for contraband tobacco. The cost of doing business legitimately, if it gets too high, it creates that incentive to go underground. And I want that element, I find, was not really addressed within this bill. And I think we see some competing and contradicting ministries at play here. We certainly know the intention of the minister on this one is to improve the health and safety in this province, but at the same time other ministries increasing the cost of doing business legitimate can be conflicting and competing with the minister's interest. I think it's also clear that the Dean panel report explicitly stated that this should be cost neutral. There should be no additional costs employed or imposed on industry. And again, I think we understand one of the reasons why that. He understands that underground economy, don't want to increase, further burden legitimate employers. But we don't have a good handle on the cost of this bill. Of course, much of this bill is going to be left to regulations that we in this House won't see or be able to review. Is this bill going to be cost neutral for our employers? Are we going to find those efficiencies and hopefully not create those incentives in the marketplace for people to expand the underground economy? The other thing is, and I understand the difficulty here, in legislation we're taking a piece of legal framework and trying to illustrate what that's going to look like in practice. It's very difficult. you know, how do we demonstrate what a construction site is going to look like in a piece of legislation, or a restaurant, or whatever the industry is going to be. But the bill is pretty light on training. There's one line item in it about training. The Dean panel report focused significantly on training. There's widespread agreement that there is a need for training. But what that training is going to be and what is it going to cost, we have no idea about that with this bill. Hopefully it would be nice. I think it would be a powerful statement by the minister if, when the regulations were developed for this, that he brought forward them to the Standing Committee of the House for a stakeholder review. I think that would demonstrate a very powerful commitment that the minister is interested in making sure that industry is being heard and that their wishes are being seen. Because, as I've said, this is the first time we've seen this, that I've seen it. I've seen so many other cases, so many other examples where stakeholders have been heard, but their concerns not addressed. You know, Bill 151, for example, this week, significant opposition from industry on Bill 151. The other thing is that we want to see, that I would like to see, and I think the taxpayers of this province want to see, and industry, the Dean panel report demonstrated and illustrated the need for a tracking system on training. This is going to be could be very problematic. You know, is training that has been received by one employer, is it going to be acceptable to another employer? There's going to be a lot of, and we don't want to duplicate, triplicate, and create redundant training programs. So they've asked for a tracking system. We know that this government and our bureaucracy is not very good at creating or managing or implementing tracking systems. E-health comes to my mind right off the bat, but I think there's a few other tracking systems like gun registries and whatnot that don't have a very substantial or effective track record. So there's no mention in this. I'd like maybe if the minister or the parliamentary assistant has some opportunity throughout the debate how that tracking system is going to be, if there's some concepts, some ideas on how that's going to be actually put into place. And I think the other thing that's important, the parliamentary assistant mentioned the 400 Ministry of Labour inspectors, and that there's been an increase in the inspectors. I think it's important for the minister to know that your 400 inspectors, there is a wide variation in competencies out there in the field, that I've had direct experience with a number of them, both on the job site before I became a member of this legislature, and afterwards as an advocate and as a member for representing employers in my riding. And I do want to share this one story with the minister and with this House, just to demonstrate the wide variation that we get in labour inspectors. I was at a Home Builders Association meeting one evening in Perth, and the Home Builders Association had invited the Ministry of Labour Construction Safety Inspector, the Enforcement and Compliance Officer, to the Home Builders meeting to have a discussion because they had a number of concerns. And it was interesting because as the Ministry of Labour Inspector was up giving his address about the need for a safe workplace, and he referred to the contractors as targets of opportunity. And this is a direct quote. Targets of opportunity. Right? This Ministry of Labour inspector, who was invited to sit with all these contractors and have a meal with, referred to the contractors as targets of opportunity, that he went out looking for fines. That's what his view was. This is not a story of make-believe or imagination, Minister. This is a first-hand, direct story. And, you know, I'm not suggesting for a moment that all 400 inspectors are like this. But there are a number of inspectors that I've met directly. And I would like this, one of the things that I do like with this bill, that it does come, that I hope what I read in this bill and what in practice is that the minister will have direct accountability. Right? That when there are problems in the field or in the training, that members such as myself, members throughout this legislature, will be able to go to the minister and demonstrate a failing or perceived failing, and that the minister will have the authority and the wherewithal to make that correction. Because too often we've seen the trend over the last number of years, and since I've been here, is that there's been more and more delegation of ministerial authority to subordinate bodies of this legislature. And it does, when that happens, we see a growth of difficulty in getting results done. We get that decision making and that influence ability being obstructed. So that is one element of this bill that has been a different trend from what we've seen from other bills in this House. Again, I'll refer to Bill 151, where decisions in forestry, on forestry licenses, are going to be delegated out to another agency of this legislature. Right? I think it's really important that all members in this House recognize that we need to have a remedy and a process for a remedy for our constituents so that we can advocate for them. So if we do find that one oddball who thinks contractors are targets of opportunity, that there is a manner in which we can correct that failing. So that's, I could give you a number of other examples on inspectors, but I think the minister gets my point on this. There is one other thing that I was disappointed with in the committee on the clause by clause. There was one element, one amendment that was proposed by myself, by the PC party, and that was to recognize non-union employers, non-union workers, as a distinct group. At the present time, the way the bill is written, unionized workers have a distinct number of spots on that advisory recommendation body, but non-union workers do not have the same recognition. And I want to put it on the record, you know, over 70% of the employees, 70% of the workers in this province are non-unionized. Less than 30% are unionized. Why does the tail get certain recognitions, but the rest don't? Right? This is, now I could be cynical and say, well, this is just par for the course. We've seen it with the relationship between this government, this Liberal government, and unions. But regardless of that relationship, regardless of the working families, regardless of any of that, there is still an underlying responsibility that we recognize all workers, not just a few. Right? And by all means, by certain means, we ought to recognize at least the majority of workers in this province. So with that, I'd like to end off my debate on this. I trust the minister will accept the debate in as it's been intended, to offer up some substantive criticism, but constructive, and that we make sure that the workers of this province indeed are well served by this new legislation. Thank you. To thank the Minister of Research and Innovation, the member from Welland, from Scarborough, and of course my colleague from Leeds Grenville. I want to focus on maybe 2 points here. The first was the member from Welland's comments that unionized workplaces are safer than non-unionized. Well, that is a popular myth, and it's one that I've seen myself, that working in both union and non-union construction, it has no basis in fact. It's one that the unions like to suggest, but it has no fact to it. I also want to the minister, when I was talking about the cost of doing business, the cost of doing business is not just taxation. In this province, we have over 500,000 regulations. There is a substantial cost, not just direct financial cost, but a cost in time to comply with those regulations. That should be understandable to the minister, that we want to reduce the cost for those businesses so that they indeed are not going underground. And that does not conflict with our federal counterparts. And I also just want to make mention to the parliamentary assistant that what we're looking for, what I would think is appropriate, is if we're going to identify unionized workers as having a unique spot on those councils, that we ought to do the same thing for non-union.